The global banking system is losing somewhere between $8 and $12 billion a year. And it's not from cyber attacks or trading failures. It's because the most advanced financial computers on Earth cannot tell the difference between a street name and a city. We know exactly what the fix is. And somehow, most banks are still choosing the wrong answer.
Welcome to Resolved, Address Intelligence Insights for Global Payments. I'm Jenny, and today we're getting into one of the most expensive hidden problems in global finance right now. And most of the industry doesn't even know they're causing it. There's a regulatory mandate called ISO 20022 that is reshaping how banks handle payment data, and most institutions are getting their response to it completely wrong. I've got Parth here, founder of ioNova AI, 30-plus years building payment and compliance systems across 55 countries. And he's going to tell us exactly what's happening, why it matters, and what's at stake as we head into November 2026. Let's get into it. Parth, let's start with the problem itself. You've written about this $8 to $12 billion annual loss in your newsletter, Resolved, for someone who hasn't come across that number before. Walk us through where it's actually coming from.
It comes from what we call exception processing, when a cross-border payment can't be automatically routed because the address data is messy or ambiguous. It falls out of the automated queue, and a human analyst has to manually figure out where the money is supposed to go. That costs the bank anywhere from $25 to $50 per payment. And right now, the industry's average straight-through processing rate for cross-border payments is only about 40%. So 60% of international payments are hitting that manual queue. If you're a mid-tier bank running 500,000 cross-border payments a year, you're looking at $7 to $15 million in pure operational waste annually, just because your system can't parse an address.
And the root cause is address data that isn't structured properly.
Exactly. A free text address that looks perfectly clear to a human mail carrier is, to an automated banking system, just an impenetrable wall of text. The computer can't tell where the street name ends and the city begins. That confusion is what triggers the exception.
So, ISO 20022 is supposed to fix this. The mandate says banks need to move to fully structured addresses, every field in its own dedicated box. But you've been pretty direct in your writing about the fact that most banks are choosing a weaker version of compliance called hybrid addressing. What's actually going on there?
Regulators understood that moving to full structure is a big transition, especially for banks running legacy systems that are 30 or 40 years old. So they allowed a transitional format, hybrid, where you only have to put the town and country in structured fields, and you can shove everything else into free text lines. The intent was, this is a temporary minimum for institutions that genuinely can't move faster. But what I'm seeing is banks looking at that and saying, great, we'll build our entire compliance strategy around the temporary minimum. They're optimizing for the floor,
When they could be building for the ceiling for the exact same cost.
That's the part that's genuinely frustrating. The implementation approach, what we call a sidecar architecture, where you bolt a structured data layer onto your existing legacy system without rebuilding the core, takes 10 to 16 weeks either way. The API call are identical. The testing cycles are identical. The cost is identical. The only difference is, if you build for full structure, you automatically satisfy hybrid as a subset. If you only build for hybrid, you cannot go back later without doing the entire project again. Banks are voluntarily paying the same price today to guarantee they'll have to pay it again in 2 or 3 years. Quick pause here. I want to speak directly to anyone watching who's currently in the middle of this migration or still trying to figure out where your institution actually stands. I'm happy to spend 30 minutes with you, just a conversation. We'll look at where you are on the structured address timeline, identify any gaps between where you are and where you need to be by November, and walk through your implementation options. No pitch, no sales process. Just 30+ years of having these exact conversations with banks and payments teams applied to your specific situation. If that's useful, the link is in the description. Reach out and we'll find time. Alright, back to it.
Let's talk about what the hybrid junk drawer actually costs beyond the exception fees, because this is where it gets really interesting. You have an example in your newsletter about Cuba Street that I think perfectly illustrates the problem.
Yes, sanction screening. This is where the stakes go from expensive to genuinely dangerous. If you're sending a payment to a business on Cuba Street in Wellington, New Zealand, and your bank is using a hybrid address where all the street information is mashed into one free text block, your automated screening engine scans that block, sees the word Cuba, and freezes the payment. Because Cuba is a comprehensively sanctioned nation, the system has no way to know it's a street name, not a country.
And there's also the issue of common name false positives, right?
Yeah, take Muhammad Ali. It's a common name, but it gets flagged because it matches sanctioned individuals in places like Syria. These aren't edge cases. Because of exactly this kind of string-level matching, false positive rates in sanction screening regularly exceed 95%. Compliance officers are spending their days clearing celebrity names and New Zealand street names instead of hunting actual financial crime. Fully structured addresses drop those false positives by roughly 30% because the word Cuba is safely inside the field labeled street name and the field labeled country says New Zealand. The screening engine only checks the right box.
So we have millions in exception costs, we have a broken sanctions screening process, and now we have a hard deadline coming, November 2026. I want to ask you directly, why is this a 5-alarm fire right now, in early 2026, if the deadline is still months away?
Because the technology is actually the fast part. A sidecar integration takes 10 to 16 weeks. What takes forever is everything before that. Vendor selection, procurement, information security reviews, because you're touching live payment data, user acceptance testing across multiple jurisdictions, board budget approval that might only happen quarterly. End to end, that internal process takes 6 to 9 months at a large institution. If you need to be live by November and your red tape takes 9 months, you should have started this conversation in February. Some banks are already late.
And the vendor capacity issue makes that even worse.
If everyone waits until Q3 to approve budget, they're all trying to book the same specialist teams at the same time. The top-tier vendors will be full. You'll either pay emergency pricing or miss the deadline entirely. And missing the deadline means your cross-border payments get hard rejected by the network. Not flagged. Rejected. That's a catastrophic operational failure.
Before we wrap, I want to ask about the technology itself, because the instinct a lot of people have is, it's 2026. Just throw a large language model at the problem. Have an AI clean the addresses. Why doesn't that work?
3 reasons. First, hallucinations. LLMs are probabilistic, they guess. If an address is ambiguous, the model might invent a postal code that looks realistic but doesn't exist. You cannot put hallucinated data into a sanctions screening pipeline. Second, latency. Cross-border payment gateways need to process in under 50 milliseconds. A complex LLM prompt takes 1 to 5 seconds. That's 100 times too slow for real-time payment flows. And third, and this is critical in a regulated environment, LLMs are black boxes. They can't give you a deterministic audit trail. If a regulator asks why a specific transaction was cleared, the model thought it was statistically probable is not an acceptable answer.
Which is why what ioNova built is specifically deterministic.
Everything runs through a 4-stage cascade. Exact match first. If we recognize the entity from our global database, it resolves in under 5 milliseconds. If there's a typo, fuzzy matching corrects it deterministically. If the data is contextually ambiguous, say, Washington with no other context, NLP processing analyses the surrounding structure to disambiguate. Those 3 stages handle 98% of global addresses with no guessing, using hard, auditable rules. The final 2%, genuinely broken edge cases, Go to an agentic workbench with human-in-the-loop capability, and every single decision generates a cryptographically timestamped audit log. If a regulator asks why Cuba Street wasn't flagged, the system instantly produces the exact deterministic rule that identified it as a street in New Zealand. The audit trail isn't an afterthought, it's the whole point.
Parth, this has been incredibly clarifying. 30 years of seeing these systems fail and succeed in the real world really comes through. For anyone watching who works in banking or payments, the takeaway is simple. Hybrid addressing is not a real compliance strategy. The November deadline has a very tight internal timeline, and the cost of doing this properly is exactly the same as the cost of doing it badly. The only question is whether you want to do it once or twice. Thanks so much for being here. And if you want to go deeper, Parth's newsletter, Resolved, covers the ISO 20022 migration in detail. Link is in the description. We'll see you in the next one.